I never thought I would be the kind of man who questioned his own marriage, yet doubt crept in slowly, disguising itself as concern and then as quiet dread. At first, everything looked normal from the outside. We shared meals, exchanged routine conversations, and went through the motions of daily life like a couple that had simply grown comfortable. But comfort slowly gave way to distance. She started guarding her phone like it held state secrets, angling the screen away from me, silencing notifications, stepping out of the room to take calls she once would have answered openly. When I asked simple questions, her answers felt rehearsed, too quick, too smooth. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself marriages go through phases, that stress can change people, that not every cold moment means betrayal. Still, the feeling refused to leave. It sat in my chest like a weight, growing heavier with every unexplained late night and every sudden plan that didn't include me. She became emotionally unavailable, distracted even when sitting right beside me. The intimacy we once shared faded, replaced by irritation and impatience, as if my presence itself annoyed her. The truth revealed itself on a day that should have meant nothing. She left her laptop open on the dining table when she rushed out to run an errand. I wasn't looking for anything. I simply walked past, and a message preview caught my eye. One sentence was enough to stop me cold. It wasn't friendly, it wasn't innocent, it was intimate in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. My heart started pounding as I read more, each line stripping away another layer of denial. What I discovered wasn't a single mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a full-blown affair, complete with inside jokes, emotional confessions, and plans made behind my back. There were conversations stretching back months, maybe longer. I felt sick as I realized how carefully she had balanced two lives, one with me, predictable and stable, and another filled with excitement and secrecy. Every time she had told me she was tired, busy, or stressed, she had been lying without hesitation. As I scrolled through the messages, memories rearranged themselves in my mind. The nights she came home unusually cheerful. The weekends she suddenly needed space. The way she accused me of not trusting her whenever I asked for reassurance. It all made sense now, and that clarity hurt more than confusion ever could. I wasn't just betrayed. I was manipulated into doubting my own instincts. I didn't feel rage right away. What washed over me first was a deep, crushing sadness. I thought about the promises we had made, the future we planned, and how easily she had risked it all without a second thought. I felt foolish for believing loyalty was mutual, for assuming honesty still mattered. In that moment, the marriage I thought I had was already over. I just happened to be the last one to know. When I finally confronted her, I didn't raise my voice or accuse her blindly. I laid the truth out in front of her with a calm I didn't know I still possessed. I told her I knew about the affair, about the messages, about the lies stacked on top of lies. For a brief moment, she froze like someone caught in a spotlight. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape or a story convincing enough to erase what I already knew. Then her expression hardened, and I realized this wasn't going to end with honesty or regret. She immediately flipped the narrative. Instead of apologizing, she accused me of spying on her, of invading her privacy, of being paranoid and controlling. Her words came fast and sharp, each one designed to put me on the defensive. I tried to stay focused, reminding her that none of that changed what she had done. That was when her voice rose, filling the room with anger so intense it felt physical. She wasn't ashamed of cheating, she was furious that her secret was exposed. As the argument escalated, her insults became more personal. She attacked my character, my efforts, even my worth as a husband. Every vulnerability I had ever shared with her was suddenly thrown back at me like a weapon. I could feel the situation slipping out of control, but I still believed it would remain verbal. I was wrong. Without warning, she shoved me hard, both hands slamming into my chest. I staggered backward, stunned more than hurt. For a second, neither of us spoke. I searched her face for shock or regret, something that suggested she hadn't meant to cross that line. Instead, I saw rage and desperation. She stepped forward again, screaming that I was ruining her life, that I had no right to destroy everything. Then she hit me again, harder this time, knocking me into a table. That was the moment fear set in. Not fear of pain, but fear of how unpredictable she had become. This wasn't an emotional argument anymore. It was a volatile situation with someone who felt cornered and out of control. She started throwing things, whatever was within reach, objects crashing against walls, shattering the sense of safety in a home that once felt secure. I kept backing away, telling her to stop, trying to de-escalate, but logic had no place in that room anymore. What cut deepest wasn't just the physical attack, but the realization behind it. The woman I trusted most was willing to hurt me to protect her lies. I wasn't her partner in that moment. I was an obstacle. Every shove, every scream made it painfully clear that exposure terrified her more than losing me ever had. Standing there, heart racing, I understood something I had been unwilling to accept before. This confrontation had gone far beyond betrayal. The marriage was already broken, but now my safety was at risk. The line had been crossed, and there was no undoing it. Whatever came next would no longer be about saving a relationship. It would be about protecting myself from someone who had chosen violence over accountability. After the chaos finally paused, the house fell into an eerie silence broken only by my own breathing. My chest hurt not just from where she had shoved me, but from the realization that the situation had slipped completely out of my control. I backed into the bedroom and closed the door, locking it with shaking hands. I could hear her pacing on the other side, muttering angrily, slamming drawers, still raging as if I were the one who had betrayed her. That was when it truly sank in. This wasn't going to calm down on its own. I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying everything that had just happened. Part of me wanted to believe it was a one-time explosion, that she would come to her senses and feel remorse. But another part of me, the part that was still trembling, knew better. Someone who crosses from words into violence doesn't simply step back because emotions cool. The danger wasn't hypothetical anymore, it had already happened. I thought about how easily it could escalate further, how quickly desperation could turn into something irreversible. For a moment I hesitated. Calling the police felt extreme, like a final nail in a coffin that was already sealed. I worried about what it would look like, about how people would judge me, about the permanent consequences for her. She was still my wife, after all. We shared a history, memories, years of life intertwined. But then another thought cut through the guilt. She hadn't hesitated when she attacked me. She hadn't stopped to consider the consequences for me. Why was I still protecting her at the expense of my own safety? As I listened to her shouting from the other room, accusing me of ruining everything, the decision became clearer. This was no longer a private marital issue. It was a volatile situation involving physical harm, and I had every right to protect myself. My hands were still shaking when I picked up my phone, but my mind felt strangely focused. I wasn't calling out of revenge or spite. I was calling because I didn't feel safe in my own home. When I dialed the number, my voice came out steadier than I expected. I explained that there had been a domestic incident, that I had been attacked, that things were escalating. Saying the words out loud made the situation feel painfully real. This wasn't something I could minimize anymore. This was an official acknowledgement that the line had been crossed. As I waited, I locked myself in, staying as far from her as possible, listening for any sudden movements. In those minutes, a strange mix of emotions washed over me: fear, sadness, and an unexpected sense of resolve. I knew that once the police arrived, there would be no taking it back. Whatever happened next would set off a chain of events neither of us could control. But for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt like I was doing something to protect myself instead of just reacting to her choices. When I finally heard the knock at the door, I felt both dread and relief. Dread for what this meant for our future, and relief that I wasn't alone anymore. Calling the cops wasn't about ruining her life. It was about stopping the situation before it destroyed mine. When the officers stepped inside, the atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. The chaos that had filled every corner just minutes earlier was replaced by a tense, suffocating stillness. They separated us immediately, asking calm but direct questions, their presence making it clear that this was no longer an argument that could be shouted over or brushed aside. As I explained what had happened, I noticed how matter of fact they were, taking notes, observing the room, looking at the overturned furniture and broken objects that silently confirmed my words. She tried to regain control the only way she knew how, by rewriting the story. From the other side of the room, I could hear her crying, insisting that I had provoked her, that I was exaggerating, that it was just a heated argument. But her version unraveled quickly. The marks on my chest, the disarray in the house, and her own emotional volatility painted a very different picture. The officers weren't interested in excuses, they were focused on facts. As the questions continued, the reality of consequences began to sink in for her. Her anger slowly turned into panic. The confident aggression she'd shown earlier evaporated, replaced by pleading and frantic explanations. She asked if this could just be handled privately, if there was a way to make it go away. Watching that shift was unsettling. The same person who had attacked me hours earlier was now terrified of accountability. It was painfully clear that she never expected her actions to carry real weight. When the officers told her she was being detained, the room seemed to shrink. Her protests grew louder, her words tumbling over each other as she realized this wasn't a scare tactic. It was happening. Neighbors began to notice the flashing lights outside, curtains moving, eyes watching. The private life she had worked so hard to protect was now exposed in the most public way possible. Every lie, every secret, every reckless decision had led to this moment. As she was escorted out, the emotional impact hit me harder than I expected. There was no satisfaction in watching it unfold. What I felt instead was a heavy, sobering clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was the natural outcome of choices she had made long before she ever laid hands on me. The affair, the deception, the violence, it had all built toward this collapse. I hadn't ruined her life, she had dismantled it piece by piece. In the days that followed, the fallout spread quickly. Family members called, some shocked, others skeptical, a few supportive. Friends took sides or went silent. Legal proceedings began, cold and procedural, stripping emotion out of the situation and reducing everything to timelines, statements, and evidence. Her reputation suffered almost immediately. The image she had carefully curated no longer matched the reality people were learning about. Through it all, I focused on one thing: distance. Distance from the chaos, from the manipulation, from the version of my life that had nearly swallowed me whole. The consequences she faced were no longer in my control, and for the first time I understood that they didn't need to be. Justice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, relentless, and unavoidable. And as the dust began to settle, I realized that the fallout, as painful as it was, marked the end of a nightmare I had survived rather than a victory I had sought. When the legal process moved forward and the noise around the incident slowly faded, I found myself alone in a quiet that felt unfamiliar. For years, my life had revolved around keeping the peace, overlooking red flags, and prioritizing a marriage that no longer existed in the way I believed it did. Now, with distance forced upon me, I had space to think. Space that was uncomfortable at first, but necessary. The silence wasn't empty, it was honest. There were moments when guilt tried to creep in. I replayed everything in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if calling the police had been too harsh, if I should have walked away sooner. But each time those thoughts surfaced, I reminded myself of the facts. I didn't create the betrayal. I didn't choose violence. I didn't force her into the decisions that led to legal consequences. Accountability wasn't cruelty. It was reality. Slowly, I began to rebuild parts of myself that had been worn down without me noticing. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, people who reminded me who I was before my world shrank to managing someone else's secrets and moods. I focused on my health, my work, and simple routines that brought a sense of control back into my life. Each small step felt like reclaiming territory I had unknowingly surrendered. What surprised me most was how my perspective changed. I stopped seeing the end of the marriage as a personal failure and started recognizing it as a hard-earned lesson. Trust without boundaries had cost me dearly. Love without respect had left me vulnerable. Understanding that didn't make me bitter, it made me stronger. I learned that protecting yourself isn't weakness, and walking away from chaos is sometimes the bravest decision you can make. There was also closure in accepting that I didn't need revenge or validation from others. The truth had already done its work. I didn't need to explain myself to everyone or convince people to take my side. Those who mattered understood, and those who didn't were no longer my responsibility. Letting go of that burden felt like setting down a weight I had carried for far too long. As time passed, the anger faded, replaced by something steadier, self-respect. I stopped defining myself by what had been done to me and started focusing on what I deserved moving forward. Peace, safety, honesty. The future no longer felt like a fragile promise dependent on someone else's loyalty. It felt open, shaped by my own choices. Looking back, I don't see a story about ruining someone's life. I see a story about surviving betrayal, drawing a line when it mattered most, and choosing dignity over denial. The ordeal took something from me, but it also gave me clarity. I walked away changed, yes, but not broken. I walked away knowing that my life, rebuilt on truth and self-respect, was finally my own.